All right, we are 30 minutes into the U.S. trading day on this Tuesday, April 9th. Here are the top stories we're following. State Street versus everyone else, with the firm's chief investment officer sticking to a call for a half-point Fed cut in June as the rest of Wall Street dials back their bets. EVs in focus, with Tesla's first CEO, Martin Eberhard, saying it would be a shame for the EV maker to backtrack from its plans for a cheaper car. We'll discuss the global competitive EV landscape and increasing exposure to alternatives. A conversation with Kristen Olson, global head of the Alternative Capital Markets Group for Goldman Sachs, about why ultra-wealthy investors are still underweight. She joins in our Wall Street Week daily segment. I'm Katie Greifeld in New York. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. And you take a look at markets on this Tuesday. We do have some green on the screen, another quiet day, but the S&P 500 currently higher by about 0.1%. I did say it was quiet. You take a look at big tech behind me, the NASDAQ 100 currently up about 0.2%, 0.3% even. And then you take a look at small caps, not exactly leading, but not the laggard either. The Russell 2000 currently up by about 0.2%. But in some ways, it really feels like the trading week starts tomorrow with March's CPI reading. Joining us for more is Bloomberg's Mike McKee. And Mike, how consequential are these figures tomorrow at 8:30 a.m.? Brought up that U.S. small business optimism reading falling to an 11-year low. Definitely feels a little out of step with the data on the ground. But let's be pragmatic here and talk about how much it matters for the equity market, those two extremes. What's the difference between 3 cuts versus no cuts this year for the equity market's performance? So finding those undervalued names, because I mean, if you take a look at the sector performance year to date, a really rough guide here. I mean, I see energy up at the top. We haven't seen that in a while. You also see financials and industrials punching above their recent weight. What sort of sectors and industries are you finding those opportunities? Later on this week on Friday, along with JP Morgan and Citi. But actually, a conversation I was having a couple of weeks ago with Rob Arnott, of course, of Research Affiliates, was, okay, there's a lot of undervalued companies in the market right now, but how do you go about identifying and then avoiding the value traps?
Well, for us, I think they're
necessarily value traps that aren't cheap for a reason there, other than just the market has kind of been ignoring them. What is the typical catalyst that you need to see for sort of that market attention, that focus to come back to some of those names? Quick look at what's moving now underneath the markets with Bloomberg's Emily Grafeo. And Emily, starting with a blast from the past. Yeah, well, BlackBerry this year up 16% year to date, and that's after it rallied about 51% last year. So clearly a lot of people buying those jeans. Bloomberg's Emily Grafeo, thank you so much. Now coming up, Tesla's first CEO says it's a shame if the automaker scraps plans to build its low-end car. And that, of course, was Martin Eberhard. He is the first Tesla CEO, speaking to Bloomberg Television at the HSBC Global Investment Summit in Hong Kong. Now, it was reported, side research notes out on the heels of that announcement. A lot of skepticism there. Bloomberg's Craig Trudell, thank you so much for that update. Let's broaden back out to these markets, because still with us, we have Kuei Nguyen. She is Research Affiliates CIO. So we were talking a little bit before the break about Micron, of course, one of those AI names that isn't NVIDIA. Talk to us more about the space in AI outside of NVIDIA, because it feels like more and more that's where the eyeballs are going.
Sure.
Some of these names is, where are we on the AI investing timeline? Because it feels like it really started with the chips, of course, building out those chips that enable AI. Is that still where the best investment opportunities are, in the picks and shovels, versus maybe some of the industries that will be disrupted positively by AI? Transformational, but it's maybe too early to really pick the winners here. Is it too early to then also pick who might be a loser here? So, I mean, there's your use case there. Let's broaden out, though. Let's also talk, of course, about healthcare, because that's also a sector that you highlight. Healthcare, it's been really interesting because you have some of the companies that have been basically moonshots with GLP-1s, but then it also feels like you have a lot of those underloved names that you were perhaps talking about.
Sure. I mean,
Kuei Nguyen of Research Affiliates. Now, still ahead, we're going to take a look at the companies making the most social buzz today in our Social Climbers segment up next. This is Bloomberg. All All right, it's time now for Social Climbers. A look at the stocks making waves on social media this morning. And first up, Spirit Airlines trying to save some cash. The discount airline just announced a new cost-cutting program that will push out the delivery of new planes into the next decade. It will also furlough about 260 pilots. And of course, this news comes less than 3 months after the proposed merger with JetBlue was blocked over antitrust concerns. Next up, we have GM's self-driving ambitions trying to get back on track. Its autonomous vehicle division called Cruise is testing robo-taxis today in Phoenix. The taxi company has been working to earn the public's confidence after one of its cars struck and dragged a pedestrian in San Francisco in October. Now, the robo-taxi business is a key part of Mary Barra's goal to double revenue by 2030. And finally, we have Pfizer seeking wider use of its RSV shot. The pharma giant will ask the FDA to extend the shot's approval to adults over 18 years old after the trials show it produced an immune response in adults who had asthma, diabetes, or chronic lung disease. Now, coming up, we are going to be talking about luxury retailers. Well, Blackstone's bet in apartments is spurring a rally in the sector. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle joins us now with more. Great setup into our next guest, and we're joined now by Joe Sitt. He is Thor Equities chairman, and Thor Equities is a global leader in the real estate industry with assets in the U.S., Europe, and Latin America. And I want to start in the States because Abigail poses an interesting question. When it comes to commercial real estate, and particularly for office, do you think that we've seen the bottom? From yesterday about what's going on in New York City when it comes to some of these luxury retailers such as Chanel. According to a person familiar, Chanel in discussions to buy 745 Fifth Avenue, but it's also competing against the likes of LVMH. This is, again, according to people familiar. And the fact that you see this competition among luxury retailers for some of these best buildings, these big name buildings, what signal should the rest of the market take from that?
What it is they tend to
is that structurally there are some long-term forces that are going to benefit real estate there. And I mean, we could keep going on that, but unfortunately, I only have about 90 seconds left with you. So I do want to get.
I'll just say this.
Yeah.
I'll just say this on inflation. I do think tomorrow's
minute I have left with you. Tell me about Electron, because I know you've come on Bloomberg TV, talked about it before. What is going on with that stock? It's an EV company.
First of all, we're real excited, obviously.
Conversation, really enjoyed this. That is Joe Sitt. He is Thor Equities chairman. And let's zoom back out and take a look at these equity markets. We're going to do that with Abigail Doolittle.
Well, Katie, if we take a look at the
at 8:30 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. Thank you so much. This is Bloomberg. All right, it's time now for our daily Wall Street Week conversation, and alternative investments are having their time in the spotlight as investors search for yield and liquidity. But how should investors be balancing the risk with potential return? Kristen Olson, she is global head of the Alternatives Capital Markets Group at Goldman Sachs, joins us now along with Wall Street Week's David Weston. And David, I think we're both really looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely right. As you say, they're in the spotlight. It's not like we don't notice them. So, Kristen, it's great to have you here. There's a lot.
Incredible movement into privates. And why should individuals be thinking about that? I think they're thinking for the first time about how do we.
To your point that there's still this underweight. I mean, I know it's a case-by-case basis, but is there a good rule of thumb of what sort of allocation an ultra high net worth individual should be thinking about when they're considering going into alternatives?
But you mentioned over the last 10 years, the alpha, the return has been really.
Be very attractive alpha opportunities across the private landscape.
Across the private landscape, can we drill down a little bit here? I mean, when we think about sectors, industries, where are we seeing the most interest and the most growth, whether it be in real estate or somewhere else?
So I would say the theme of
ultra high wealthy individuals should increase their exposure to alternatives. It sounds like the private companies would say the same thing because they also need that capital and that liquidity.
No, 100%. And I think the other thing you're seeing, economic activity that you're not having exposure to by only investing in public markets.
All right. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Such an interesting conversation. Really glad that we could do this. That was, of course, Kristen Olson of Goldman Sachs. And David, who else do we have to look forward to?
So I'm happy to say on Friday.
All right, let's take a quick look at some stocks hitting highs today. And you have Amazon and Google.